All right, I guess I'll just start the intro and all that now, if that's cool. So this talk is called Pro Tips for Getting into the Game Industry. And the term pro tip's kind of like an old joke where like um, the strategy guide for, I think that's the first version of Doom, had like these pro tips, which were like really kind of generic, like strategy tips that didn't really give you any new information. And so kind of the theme of this is like when you ask like, "Hey, I want to get into the game industry," you get the most generic information. And I always felt like uh, there were things that like I wish that people had told me. And so this is kind of like a talk of like things I wish that people had told me. Um, so here's the intro. I have these like suggested like things to check out here on some of these. I also compiled this into like a repository, which I'll share at the end. So just cool things to check out and search for. Um, so who is this for? This is for everyone, but specifically like I'm a coder, so this is obviously coming from my perspective as an engineer. Um, but hopefully it should be kind of open for anyone that's interested in joining the industry. So who am I? Uh, Senior software engineer at Riot Games. I've been doing it for 3.5 years now, something like that. Um, this company, currently playing Persona 5, obsessed with that. I've worked on these things. Legends of Runeterra, LOL, Valorant, Linux kernel, TensorFlow. So kind of all over the place. Specifically, I don't do any like game designy type things. I'm more like on the back end, server infrastructure, APIs, microservices, that kind of stuff. So feel free to add me on LOL or add me on GitHub, whatever you want. So uh, this is cool high school, Kevin. And in high school, like I said, I always ask like, how do I get into the game industry? And everyone said like, do good in school and study programming in college. And I didn't do either of those things. Um, and I learned that while being a good student and studying programming like totally helps, like everyone else that I work with was good in school and study programming, but like it's a good tip, but it's not the core of kind of what we're looking for in the game industry, if that makes sense. So why or why not? Blood, Sweat, and Pixels is a pretty cool book on just like stories about the game industry, and not all of them are um, super pretty. It's a lot of like failed projects, things that almost didn't get off the ground, things like that. It's interesting. Um, it's a quote from one of my favorite engineers, John Carmack. Focus is a matter of deciding what things you're not going to do. So why join the game industry? The pay is great and you get all of the social media clout, and it's a really easy job. Except this is why not to join the game industry, because the pay is on average or below other industries. Like if you're after that paycheck, maybe like a Google or Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, that kind of thing. Um, the clout, a lot of players are cool, but at the same time, sometimes it sucks to work on a game and then go on, you know, some site and see people having strong opinions about it that aren't necessarily positive. Um, and the job's not necessarily easy. Uh, we as an industry are notorious for crunch, long hours, strict deadlines. Some companies are better than others. Company I work for, I feel like, is pretty good about that. I work um, 8 hours a day on average, so not too bad. But why should you join the game industry? Because you love games. Because you are unique. We need unique people. Games require a lot of different types of people, a lot of different voices, a lot of different opinions. Because you're a trailblazer, because you love weird, unique problems that don't happen in other industries. and because you care about players. And this is, I think, the most important thing. Like, if you get excited about like creating something for your friends, then maybe you should consider joining the game industry. So be well-rounded. This is kind of what I'm talking about, where like it's not necessarily just about grades, college, things like that. Um, so let's look at two kind of stat sheets of two potential hires. Right. So this is Alex. Alex tells really good jokes, and um, I didn't label these, but like this is like programming skill, this is like communication skill, and this is like interest in, computer games, right? So like maybe Alex isn't a S tier programmer, maybe Alex is just all right, great communicator, maybe kind of into games but not obsessed with them, wide variety of interests, and then here's the other engineer, JP, right? JP is a excellent programmer, maybe not the best communicator, obsessed with games. So looking at these two, right, like obviously, if you're just looking for a super good programmer, JP is your engineer. But here's what a day looks like for me. And my engineering managers would hate seeing this. But like, I think about 80% of my time isn't actually programming, right? It's like talking in meetings and like planning things and, you know, uh, chatting with people, trolling, joking around. So 80% of your job in the game industry isn't going to be programming, like even if you're an engineer. So because of that, if we go back and we look, like you really want the well-rounded individuals for the game industry because there's so much more to it than just churning out features, which is, maybe a good thing if that's the kind of job that you're looking for. So we have unique paths, right? This is a like your standard path to getting into the game industry or like any industry, I guess, is you do good in high school, get your extracurriculars, go to a good university, internship or two, and then start as a junior or an intermediate, right? That's what you see all day. But in the game industry, this is my path. I like worked at like a hobby shop and then like kind of wanted to do art and did that for a while and like tried to become a tattoo artist and that didn't work out. And like uh, you I did a lot of different things. And this is a really common thing that you see in the game industry. Like one of my senior engineers is like a professional like car tuner. Um, One of my engineering managers was like in the special forces. Like you get a lot of really interesting people. And because of that, you can leverage everything. So if you have like unique interests that are out there, maybe you're into art, music, whatever, you can use all of that in the game industry. And that's my favorite part about it. Just a couple ideas, right? Like because I worked in a D&D shop, I like run my team's D&D game. Because I was an art major, I can like give input on like user interfaces and things like that. So like be well-rounded, pursue interests that aren't just engineering. And to kind of sum it up, right, there's an infinite number of ways to get where you want to go. Your resume. So what's a resume? Obviously, literally, a resume is your qualifications, your work history, things like that. But really, your resume is kind of like a trophy case. I like to think of it as like your like achievements. It's your place to brag, especially in the game industry, because like I said, they want unique people. And so it's a way to show who you are. Um, and I understand in high school, uh, the experience, like that's the big hurdle to getting into any industry, right? Is, well, I haven't, really done a full internship. I haven't done this, I haven't done that. And I think a unique thing to the game industry, or like software engineering in general, is that there's a lot of stuff that you can do on your own. A couple examples, open source projects. Uh, Obviously, if you're here at the hackathon, you know what that is. Indie projects, indie games, same deal. Online classes. there's a couple online class sites that are like really cheap, obviously free on YouTube, things like that. Uh, they are almost always worth taking. Networking, talk to people. Organizations, start a game development club at your school. If there isn't one, start one and become the president, right? Like charity, the climate code thing is super awesome. The idea of focusing on how you can make the world a better place and not just, make an app that is profitable is, I think, really important in 2021, right? So it's just kind of a blurb on how to network online. The core of this is don't be afraid to find someone at a company that you're interested in and say, hey, like, I want to do what you do. Can you give me 15 minutes? Like, how I was contacted to, you know, give this talk. Uh, one of the people at XT Hacks like sent me a message and was like, "Hey, we want you to talk at this thing," and I wasn't doing anything. I was super flattered. I was like, "Yeah, please, let's you know set that up." So you can always do that. I'd like to think that you know most people in the games industry would be super stoked to talk about job stuff with you. So don't be afraid to do that. Do indie projects. Again, I'm not going to go over this whole slide. I have a link to these slides at the end, but like learn an engine, like Unreal Engine, things like that. You can start making games in like a weekend. There's a lot of content. And generally people are excited to contribute. If you like someone's songs, say, hey, I'm making a game, can I use your music? And I've never asked anyone that and had them say no. So it's always good. Part two, like do game jams or just like hackathons. There's some cool content on, like the theory behind games. And this YouTube channel, Game Maker's Toolkit, create mods. Like it's easy to like make like Kerbal Space Program add-ons, things like that. And the communities really appreciate it. Or like create servers, start a Minecraft server. Guess what? You can put that on your resume. Um, yeah. And this is my most plain slide here. Have a LinkedIn, create one, talk to people. Yeah. Open source. This site here, opensource.guide, is a great way to start. But contribute and then put on your resume that you've contributed. Personal favorite project is the kernel. Here's a link to starting on the kernel if you're interested in that. But yeah, lots of open source stuff to work with. And all of this you can put on your CV, on your resume, and it looks great. Okay, so what do you want to do? Action button channel. This guy has like 6-hour reviews of like old games, and they're great. I don't know. I just discovered that and thought I put it in there, but he's great. So okay, so in the game industry, right? You think like I want to make games. One job comes to mind, the game developer, right? But really, it, you can kind of split that into like front end game developer, back end game developer, and then you can split that even further into what was that, 10 jobs, and there's even more than that, right? And then if you go outside of even development, there's a bunch of different things. We have people who are like we hire like professional psychologists and like people who like know about like clothing and fashion. Like if you're interested in something, there's probably a game company that is interested in it too. Um, so again, be uh, super well rounded, and then you can move around, right? Like these are actual examples of coworkers who I've talked to who've moved around. Like I had a friend who worked in the finance department, started working on like infrastructure development, became a systems engineer. We have a engineering manager who became a cloud engineer. A technical artist, like started working on like C++, became a front end dev, things like that. That's maybe not specifically unique to the game industry, but it's a cool part of it where uh, most of these places, at least that I've seen, you can pretty easily kind of change hats. So where do you want to work? Um, so obviously, like not all game companies are the same. There's different types. Right? There's platforms, PlayStation, Xbox, um, Sony, Valve, things like that. There's publishers who don't necessarily develop games; they just publish them, maybe provide like an infrastructure for them. There's actual developers, and then there's kind of hybrids. So here's kind of an idea of what the differences are. Um, like if you're interested more like the platform, the networking, the backend, the platforms and the publishers are generally more doing the infrastructure behind supporting games. If you want to, make the character move on the screen, right? That kind of thing. That's more of a game developer kind of thing. So definitely keep that in mind as you're searching. But the most important advice here is cast a wide net. Like a lot of people who I talk to, who are just kind of getting into the game industry, have one company in mind. Like, I mean, I know I did, right? Like I played a lot of LOL, and I was like, I want to work on LOL, and I think doing that really limits your um, options. Obviously, like if you have one company that you want to work for, they probably have 4 jobs open and you know lots of people applying to them. So something to keep in mind is just apply to everything, right? And then don't get discouraged. This is just a screenshot I took of like all the rejection emails that I could find from uh recently, or just like emails that I like didn't follow up to. Um, you get a lot of rejections, and that's any like any job. Um, but don't get discouraged. Like it's almost never personal. If it is personal, that's kind of strange that they're being personal about it. So, don't let that stop you, right? Yeah. So, quick thing on interviews. So, generally in the game industry, there are two kinds of interviews. There's the culture interview, the blue buff, and then there's the tech interview, the red buff, right? And so the culture interview, right? Just some general tips, like be yourself. Um, for certain companies, right, if you're interviewing at a defense contractor, don't be yourself. But but if you're interviewing at a game company, like definitely actually be yourself. Actually care about games and not just the games that the company you're interviewing for, um, is creating, right? Um, show that you're open to receiving feedback and things like that. Be yourself. I'd say that one already, right? But it's super important, and understand the big picture. Understand, um, how the different departments work together. Uh, the like marketing, understand like player wants, player needs, things like that. Super important for the culture interview. And then there's the tech interview. This could be a whole other talk, right? Be confident. Show off your abilities to problem solve. When we ask like interview questions, like write an algorithm to do XYZ. Some companies, I think, just want you to give like objectively the most efficient answer. But at least when I'm interviewing, I don't, because that means that you know how to solve it already. And what I care more about is I want to see you solve it, right? I don't necessarily care that it's the objectively the strongest answer. I want to see how you think through things. And I think that's something that like people don't talk about enough, but it's more important to show off your problem solving abilities. Show passion for the craft. Like get excited about programming or engineering, whatever you're doing. Read this book, Cracking the Code Interview. I have it right there. It's amazing. It's like the strategy guide to coding interviews, and it's great. It's almost like cheating, but it isn't. And don't ever prepare. Like if you spend all your time working on the tech interview, you're just going to stress yourself out. And then after interviewing, just general advice like ask for feedback, send thank you emails, connect with people on LinkedIn, and stay in contact. That they're not going to hate you for that. The recruiter's going to be like, oh wow, so and so really wants to work here, so they email me every 3 weeks. It's always good, etc. Here's all of the things that I talked about are in this repository here. I guess I'll just keep this up, but I'm gonna go for ask me anything. I'll open it up now if anyone has any things that they want to talk about, but I'll keep this slide up.
I have a question. What are some common like culture interview questions you would ask your interviewees if you do interviews?
Culture interview questions. Yeah, so I think some common ones that I've received and I've asked are things like how like they're always story questions, right? It's always like, give me an example of a time that you have had a conflict with a coworker and how have you resolved it. What they want is for you to demonstrate like a kind of cause and effect understanding of what the question is. And in fact, what I do is I generally try to think of like I'll like have like in my head, I'll keep like 5 or 10 different kind of stories that I can apply to different things. Some other ones are like, give me a time that you've had to like disagree with upper management. A game company will almost always ask, which games are you playing? And then depending on the company, they want different things. Like something I've always heard about Blizzard is that they want people who are engineers first and into games second. Riot tends to want people who are like really into games. So it just depends. There's some other ones. I can generally tell a culture interview is going well when they kind of just turn it into a conversation. How you receive feedback is another common one, things like that.
At Riot Games, where you work right now, do you often experience like that crunch culture? Do you have to like work nights to finish work?
No. I preface that with some departments do have crunch there. Like if you're working on a team that's about to put out a game, you're probably going to have to work more than 40 hours for a couple weeks. I have crunched in the sense that we have pretty troublesome on call sometimes. So like 3 a.m. pages because some cluster crashed, things like that. But I would say our crunch culture is not as bad as some of the companies I've heard of. Generally, I work 40-hour weeks, sometimes fewer than that. So it's pretty even. But question from the chat: what's your favorite game? That's like a philosophical question. I don't know. My favorite game right now is Persona 5. Like I'm gonna like jump into that like just after this. But favorite game, even though we like make Valorant, my all-time favorite game is Counter-Strike. I love Counter-Strike. I still play it, like even though we, probably should be playing Valorant instead since they're close enough. But yeah. Does anyone have anything else? Happy to chat about anything.
You play League, right?
Yeah, I'm awful though. I'm like high bronze.
What do you think of the new champion?
I haven't gotten to play it yet. Um, I've played him in team fight tactics and he's good. Um, but yeah, like he kind of reminds me of Talon, but I haven't had a chance to play him yet. Um, he seems interesting.
Maybe you can talk about one of the projects you worked on at Riot Games.
Sure, yeah. So, hmm. See, that's an example of an interview question, right? Like that's
Oh,
something I would ask, I guess. But yeah, so I don't know. Trying to think of a interesting project. Okay, yeah. So I worked on a whole bunch of different teams, but the main team I worked on was the container orchestration team. So like we were doing like Kubernetes for all of our clusters, and like I had said before, the on-call was terrible. Like I was getting paged at like 2 in the morning more nights a week than um, I wasn't getting paged. Like it would screw up all of our sleep schedules. We had a team of 8 engineers, so it was um, once every 2 months you would have to be on call for a full week, and I dreaded it. Like I almost quit my job because of it. And finally, it got to the point where we were shipping Legends of Runeterra, which was going to add a whole bunch of other players, right? And so the on-call was going to get more involved. Um, and so I was kind of talking about how to solve this, and we had developed these like scripts that we had in a repository. We just called it auto mediation scripts, and it was like the server crashes, these scripts would restart the server, or like scale up, scale down, things like that. So we ended up taking those scripts and without like as an unplanned thing, basically we took a Kafka queue of our PagerDuty alerts, right? The things that would like alert us on our on-call app, and it would stop them before it paged us and would attempt to execute some of these scripts depending on what the alert was. And then if it resolved the problem, it would like resolve the page without like waking me up at 3 in the morning. And it was more of just a like me being salty and not wanting to like get paged at 3 in the morning. But the upper management people were so excited at this because it ended up saving like hundreds of engineer hours, that they basically created a team from this one project and like gave us basically full time open access to develop this like into a full project. So that's something that I'm like most proud of because it saved um, a bunch of my coworkers from like being woken up at 3 in the morning and probably like 1,000 engineer hours. Um, Stuart asked, "What's my first programming language?" Q Basic. I was in elementary school, and I had a like my parents worked like jobs that were like ended at like 7 and 8 p.m. So I would stay at school afterwards, and the computer teacher at school was like a hobbyist game developer, and he like showed us emulators, and I actually asked him like, hey, how do I make games? And he ended up being like, as I said, like a hobbyist game developer, and so he taught us Q Basic, which is like it was like MS DOS type stuff. It was very very simple but uh incredible. um Hobbies outside of work, like to work on cars. drones, my drones up there. Um, it's all like basically engineering stuff, right? It's like things that you can like do programming on. I enjoy outside of work, so it's kind of an obsession. Art on occasion, but not so much as of late. What systems do you use to create game concepts and story characters? So I personally don't necessarily work on like the concepts and stories and things like that. Um, but I'm pretty sure there is a blog post about that on kind of how like the whole champion creation process goes. Um, we call our characters champions, but like basically, I think it's this kind of a structured system where they have a whole bunch of ideas, um, very general ideas, right? Like maybe a character example is like an ice archer, right? And then this idea of ice archer kind of they throw a bunch of other kind of specific ideas at it, and so it evolves from that. Um, John also asks, how long does one video game project take to complete from start to finish? That really depends. Like we've had um, we've had like I think Valorant took like 8 years. You have games like Cyberpunk 2020 or 2077 was like in development for like 15 years, I think. And then you have games like Teamfight Tactics, which I think they made in like 3 months. So it really depends on the type of game. Sam J asks, what are your thoughts on indie game developing versus joining pre-existing gaming companies? Yeah, it's a good question. So like, it's different experiences. If you want to make a game, go and make a game. Um, it's a whole different experience, but at the same time, um, your time is how to put this is like possibly more like it's a gamble, right? It's like a startup. Like you may join a startup and work on equity and not make anything afterwards. Um, or you could make, the new Facebook. It really depends on if you're up for gambling, but it's a good experience. I think everyone interested in games should like make a game. It's easy enough to do now. Um, yeah. Are there any games that you want to work on outside of Riot? Um, Interesting. I'm working on an indie game with a friend of mine where it's like a tower defense game where as you're putting towers, it's like creating an electronic music song, right? So like one tower might be the drum machine and one tower might be like the synthesizer. Um, so definitely that. It's like really early stages, but I'm always kind of working on small projects. If I could work on any game outside of like the stuff that we do, I don't really know. Like stuff like Gran Turismo, like the crazy like high end graphics, I think would be pretty interesting to do like engineering on, just because they're like really innovating. Um, yeah.
Does anyone else have any more questions? Yeah, I think that's it for today. Thank you for coming today, Kevin.
Hey, I appreciate it, everyone. That this was great. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn or LOL. Always happy to chat.
Yeah, sure. To all of our attendees here, we have another workshop at 4 p.m. Be sure to come. And once again, thank you so much. Without your our hackathon wouldn't be complete.
Enjoy. Happy hacking, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. See you everyone soon.